Welcome everybody to Product Tank. Product Tank event is part of an organization called Mind the Product, where we get product people together and just talk about stuff related to product. I work for a company called AWH. We build custom software products for people, and my role is product evangelist. What we want to talk about tonight is just one facet of product, which is a very large topic, and it's actually, for many people, it's confusing. I think Steve mentioned earlier when we were talking that it's really not an exact science, and it's hard to figure out, especially early on. So what we want to kind of do is have like a group discussion if you have product experience. And we've only got a couple people here so far, but our guest tonight is Steve, and he is from Accepted. He's the director of product over there. And it's my understanding, that Steve's also kind of going through this exploration around pricing. And so we're kind of going to lead with his experience, and I'll chime in. I've started a couple companies myself and had to deal with some pricing issues. And then Amber, you're also more than welcome to jump in, since you're in the growth role at your company as well. Steve, I want to start out with you. Welcome to Product Tank, man.
Hey, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So to start out, would you just mind telling us what exactly you do at Accepted, and like what does Accepted do? What's the product?
Yeah, for sure. Like you mentioned, I'm the product director there, part of the executive team. It's a pretty small company. It's a startup. It's been around 9 years, but the first 5 were very slow. The last 4 have really started to take off. I've only been there 2 years. We recently paid off our venture capitalists, so we're now 100% on our own, which is unique and kind of fun for me. And so we're making plans, enjoying our own vision, and not having that oversight. So that's fun. It is a SaaS software company. Our main product targets performing arts programs with an application platform tailored to performing arts. So a lot of universities, we have 600 university clients and a couple hundred other clients that use us for their performing arts applications to get into college and things like that. So that's the main product. We just released another product just a few months ago called Audition Room, which is a virtual audition tool in response to the pandemic, and that's working out very well also. So pricing, I do want to highlight, Lucas, what you said. Pricing is something I've had to deal with all my career. I'm facing it now because we just introduced a new product, and you and I had talked about what a good subject is. And so this one's very interesting to me. And but like you said, I only know what I know, and most of my career has been in small companies. So I would love to get more input and make this a little more interactive as people have pricing stories on how they chose a price or what they saw go wrong or whatever. I would love to get into those stories with folks as we get further along here.
Gotcha. So you mentioned that your target customers are people auditioning for university like arts programs. Is that right?
Right.
I guess for you, where does your thinking start with pricing? I know you probably came into the company with some pricing that was already set, but what's kind of like sparking the desire to explore pricing right now?
So one of the things that is a little different about the company I work for is the model is we give the product away to the universities for free, and then we charge the applicants, right? So that creates a different pricing model than you would standardly see, because the person you're selling to isn't actually paying you, right? It's the applicants that do. So that has been a challenge, because as you add more products on that you want to charge the university, the dynamic changes, because now you're asking them for money where you didn't before. So that's really what is in my mind right now to answer your question around why pricing is important at the moment.
Gotcha. So it's interesting. You've got this situation where you have a free product with the universities, and now you're trying to launch this new product. Is the new product, have you landed on a pricing model for it yet? Is it like SaaS? Is it, how are you thinking about it?
we've tried a couple different, right? A couple different ways. SaaS is one model, the main model that we've done. We've also just allowed them, if they still want to charge the applicant, like you can just make it a higher charge for the applicant. But SaaS is the model where we would like to go with a lot of upcoming products that we're looking at.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess where do you really start? Because, pricing, at least from my experience, right? Pricing is difficult in that you may not know exactly where to price something. If you price it too high, you lose customers. If you price it too low, well, then you're not making as much money as you otherwise might. So, have you started to explore different ways to think about like validating a price point?
Yes, definitely. That's something that has worked out well for me throughout several of the companies I've been in. What has been particularly successful for me, and I'm interested in if other folks on the line have done this, is we've done different levels of formality around product committees, right? I was in healthcare in my last job, and we called it a product steering committee. And it was rather formal, and we got doctors on the call, and we asked them questions about our product ideas. If we were to build this, would you buy it? Would you pay for it? What would you pay for it? Those kind of things. And that was somewhat effective. Doctors are really hard to nail down, and really pricing is not what they focus on. Money is weird in healthcare. Where I am now, in more of the education space, it's different. Much looser, but we still have a product committee that comes together, and we ask them questions, and we propose prototypes to them and get their buy-in. And by and large, that audience has been very open. They've been like, listen, here's what we see you offering here. Today we do it this way. And if we were to do yours, we could pay, maybe $10,000 for that. And they're just very honest about what their budget might be and what the value that they're seeing with you is. And we have found that if we listen to them and we price it where they tell us it should be, then they buy it and we make money. So that has been really something that I'm eager to continue to get better at, is that kind of a model.
That's super interesting. So you're involving the customer and trying to get this information out of them. Did you ever fear that, a customer would say just a lowball price just to, because they're acting out of their self-interest, they're thinking, well, maybe I'll get this down the road. How did you think about that?
Yeah, you definitely get that risk. We're fortunate that we have long-term relationships with most of the people on this committee and have built up trust. So the kind of folks that will do that several times and sort of break their trust with you, then you find a way to work them off of that committee, to be blunt, because they're not being honest with you, and they're not treating you like a partner. They're treating you like a vendor. So yeah, you've got to kind of figure that out. The other interesting thing is, you don't necessarily ask them, would you pay $10,000 for this?
Right.
You either ask them, what would you pay for it? Or you say, we're going to charge $10,000 for this. And what we found is sometimes we break that committee and we talk to 2 customers at a time. And the first customers, we say, we're going to charge $10,000 for this, see what they say. And the second customer, we're going to charge $20,000 for this. What do you think? And there's a point where they'll be like, there's no way you're going to make $20,000 off of this. And you're like, okay, well, now we know, right? Whereas if you underballed it, they're never going to say, oh, that's too small. That's too low, right? So we interview sometimes 4 or 5 times until we find out what that elasticity is. And then we know the range where we can live.
That's super interesting. Does that require that you have good relationships already with the potential customers that you're selling to? Or would you do the same thing if you were starting from scratch and try to just go out into the world and build those relationships?
I think that's a good question. I don't know. I think you ultimately, in my opinion, you have to talk to your potential customers and try to get as much information as you can. It's a whole lot easier if you know them and they're going to give you pretty honest feedback. But even if I didn't know anyone and I was starting a brand new product, I still think I would take some kind of approach like that. I would maybe learn more about the better tactics to use for people that you don't know. But I still think you have to know what people think your product is worth before you start building it, because If you think it's worth $10,000 and you find out, holy cow, there's a competitor that I didn't know about that'll sell it for 2,000, or they can just do it on their own, then they're never going to, you're going to lose money.
For sure, for sure. I want to turn this over a little bit to the audience too, and kind of ask, one, are there things that you're struggling with or thinking about with pricing, or do you have any kind of comment on sort of these approaches so far? I'm particularly interested in hearing from Amber, since you work in the growth space, and have you had to deal with this issue of validating pricing for like a new product in your own company?
Not yet, because that was done prior to me getting here. But we have a freemium strategy. And so that puts like a whole different layer on SaaS pricing. And we have sort of a different problem that I'm trying to solve right now, which is we've done a really great job on the acquisition front. And our freemium strategy in that regards from acquisition standpoint is paying off really well. But getting those free customers to see the value of paying is where we have some giant holes in the bucket. That my focus right now is how do we plug those holes up and drive users to the moment of value faster? Because that's what it's all about when you have a free product. You have to find those like aha value moments where someone's like, oh, this is so awesome, and get them to those as quickly as possible. And then they tend to not be so against paying for it.
So you're really taking the approach of trying to understand customer value, perception of value within the product, the current like existing product, right? And then is the idea, maybe we'll select this group of features and then make them the premium thing that we charge money for?
Yeah, so we have the good, better, best model right now, which is like the free plan, and then there's a mid-tier option, and then there's the enterprise plan. These were built before my tenure, but my focus right now is, what are the most valuable things in the product? How do we make sure they're discoverable to the free users? But then how do we bifurcate between our other plans to make sure that the enterprise is really the meatiest, but that there's still value in the other plan? Because we have that plan for a reason.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I want to go back to Steve and ask you a question. So you mentioned this strategy where you're doing customer interviews and you're kind of telling them, hey, here's the price. What do you think? And that's kind of what is the outcome like with their response that you're looking for? Are they just saying, okay, that's cool, I'll sign up? Or what is the like expected outcome to sort of validate like this is a acceptable price level?
Yeah, good question. There's two different ways I've seen that go down, right? One is you're with that committee and you're showing them 4 or 5 product ideas that you have, saying, would you be interested in any of these, just to explore further? And they're very preliminary, right? They might only just be a single visual that you're presenting, at which point you're just getting that very early feedback, and all you want from them on price is sort of sounds about right. Second is you're pretty confident you want to build a product. You're showing them a full-on prototype click-through, and you want to get into some nuances now on whether it's a premium model, it's SaaS, different kind of thing. And you want to say, all right, now let's get down to brass tacks on, if we build this and it's going to come out in 2021, what's the probability you're going to buy it at this price point, right? And to that degree, you're trying to line up customers before you even build, right? I have more experience on the latter side of that. I haven't been part of a company yet that does that rapid product ideation and throws that out in very many cases. But yeah.
Sorry, I don't know if I understood. So you haven't had the approach yet of like seeking the commitments before you build, or?
No, I've had more of that.
You have had more of that.
Yeah.
So you as a product, director, are you selling during this meeting? Is that, I mean, I know selling is like a dirty word kind of, because that means you're influencing the customer to a certain extent. I mean, I assume you wouldn't think of it in those terms, but do you actually get a commitment out of the customer?
It is, I would consider it a preliminary sale, yes. And they do often commit if there's a strong need and a strong desire and they want to partner with you on it. What has worked well with me is that the product team doesn't necessarily do this by themselves. They do it in conjunction with the sales team, because the sales team usually has the stronger relationship with these customers. And they sold them the initial product, and then they want to come back and say, hey, we have something else. Would you be interested in learning more? And in that sense, the sales team is introducing you and bringing you in. They're not saying much. You're showing the product, talking about it, talking about price points, and the salesperson is just there to facilitate that. That's the model that I've seen work pretty well.
Gotcha. You mentioned this term price elasticity, right? And we're kind of thinking about, if you think of price as elastic, that means there's a range of acceptable or viable values. Does that come out in these kind of interviews, or is that like a thing you still have to test later? Do you know kind of the full range and like the implications that it would have for your business?
Oh man, that's a tough one.
That's a tough question. It's kind of a two-part question, but like, does the range itself just come out of those meetings, or is it something still kind of unknown?
I think it does for the most part, right? If you've interviewed enough people, we've all taken statistics, right? By the time you get to 10, 12, 14 customers you've talked to, the returns on how elastic that's going to be is going to diminish. What I think is equally interesting, though, maybe it's a follow-on to your question, is how do you know if you got the pricing right? Either at this earlier stage or when you release the product. And reading those tea leaves has been something I've been very interested in as well. A couple patterns I've seen. If during the sale, the price negotiation never comes up, they just take your price, like, okay, that's fine. And you don't lose any deals due to price, and you're below the competition, then you're probably too low, right? If they're not pushing back at all, right? On the counter side, if price is the main thing that's blocking your deals and you're losing to competition due to price, and your churn is high because customers can't keep paying for you, then it's too high. And when it's just about right, you don't lose those kind of sales to prospects that are a good fit. And the poorer fit you don't lose them because of the price, you lose them because of features or something else. So studying that and making sure that you don't just set the price and then don't think about it again has been a nice learning curve for me as well, to try to read those tea leaves.
That is super interesting. And I've heard a couple metrics on this. One of them is from Startup School. And I say a couple metrics, there's really just the one that I've heard of, which is that you should try to increase the price by 5% at a time until you start to lose like 20% of your deals. And that's I guess the point at which you stop. I still don't know the answer if that's the optimized price or if it's somewhere below that. But do you think of it as like a ratcheting up in that way when the product's out there in the market, or is that really an interview only kind of thing that you're doing?
No, once it's out, yeah, definitely. There's a whole separate game that probably all of us in the product realm could get a salesperson on the line that probably could speak to this even better. But yeah, how price adapts over time as you add features, as you learn, our initial price was too low, we need to bump it up, and navigating those kinds of things. But yeah, I like your example there of bumping it up until the pushback is something that reaches that optimal curve that you mentioned, right? Where you're losing some deals, but the ones you're getting are getting you the maximum return.
Yeah. And that is an interesting thing as well, because maximum return is a variable which you could put in different key metrics for. Like somebody might want to optimize for acquisition, somebody else might want to optimize for profit or revenue, or any of these metrics, right? So for your product, have you kind of landed on what is the key metric that you're trying to drive with the pricing?
What impacts me more so is what features where's the cutoff line in scope where I can hit a price point that will reach profitability and not overbuild for a price point that the customer is willing to pay. If they'll only pay $10,000 for a virtual audition tool, then I can't build a tool that should cost $20,000 because of how cool it is. So part of the interview process informs to me, where's my scope cutoff? Can I spend 2 quarters building this product or 6 quarters building it, right? Based on what that elasticity, how much the customer is willing to pay for this solution.
That's super interesting. I want to know, just to pause really quick, and I see some people who are listening in, who in here, if you could just speak up, who else here is in the product space and is either a product manager or has created a product before? Andrew, I know you've created, right? You've created a product.
Yes, sir.
Were
Not as a
you
product person, but as a founder?
as a founder, right? And forgive me because I'm on the spot here, but it was like an electric vehicle, right?
Yes, sir, it was.
How did you start to think about pricing something like that? Were you kind of doing customer interviews and that sort of stuff at the time?
To some degree, we did a fair amount of market research. There were some comparables that we had in like some really niche communities of what like a couple companies that were already kind of iterating around the space we're doing, and then we were kind of playing in between the space of like recreational vehicles are here and then traditional like regular vehicles are here, and we were kind of in this in between, really focused on like that suburban neighborhood transportation. So we kind of had an idea just based on that, like there were those two extremes on the price point and trying to find our way like in the middle there. So it's kind of how we did it. The space was pretty and really still is like very nascent, so it's both art and science. And I don't think hard to say to what degree we got it perfect right, but did what we could there. I think every situation's a little bit unique to that specific situation. So, but that's what we ended up doing.
Yeah, you hit on a really interesting note about validating pricing, which is competition. And I kind of wonder, Steve, to what extent have you incorporated that into the process? Do you do like a competitive landscape research before you start to come with the initial prices?
Always, yeah, always. You try to do that. One of the neat things about software for those of us in that space, right, is often you have a competitor, but sometimes you're breaking new ground or relatively new ground where there's something kind of close, but it doesn't serve your industry or whatnot. And then how do you price can become even more interesting because you are building something that doesn't necessarily exist. At my last company, it was Halo Health, and we had a communication platform for hospitals to use. We had stiff competition. It was dog eat dog, and there was a market grab going on and all of that. So our price had to be very close to our competition. So this wasn't really an issue. We had a few differentiators that we could upsell, but otherwise we were right there in the mix with everyone else. Where I am now, not a lot of people, believe it or not, serve the performing arts industry for universities. So there's not a lot of competition in that space. So we're to some degree floating around with our pricing based on what they can pay because they don't have huge budgets. So it's a different conversation.
How do you understand what they can pay? Because that's a whole different realm of constraints. Like because it's at least you have a very defined customer segment, right? But how do you start to think about what a person could possibly pay?
Yeah, that's been tough. And one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation with you tonight and maybe get some more insight out of the group here is, like I mentioned at the beginning, we don't charge those universities. We give the product to them, and then we charge the applicants who apply to those universities. And so how much money they have to budget for software has been new ground that we've had to push this in 2020 to figure out. And so I don't know if other folks have insight into that on how you kind of know what their budget might be, or if they have limited funding, will they be honest with you about that and tell you, listen, I can pay up to this for this product, and when to know whether they're telling you the truth or when they might be just saying that to negotiate with you.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Has anybody done that kind of research before?
In the K through 12 market, people like I've noticed companies tend to do that a lot, but specifically because you're dealing with, especially if it's like public schools, you're dealing with a lot of, like just set government budgets, and really roughly speaking, like 10% of budget is going to go to anything remotely, not just software, but anything remotely software related. So I know like that's a really big deal in that industry. Google is only so helpful for that kind of thing. You can find some, but I've the only way I've ever been able to consistently find this, and I've done this a couple times for a couple robotics companies, some software products. We almost consistently have to, unless it's like a consumer product that you can just, like that's totally different. But if it's a B2B product, from my experience, you have to talk to people in the industry. Like that's pretty much the only way to get an accurate gauge on it, and you have to talk to people that aren't incentivized to hide the price from you, people that'll actually share and know what's going on, because otherwise they're going to bullshit you, like Steve was saying.
Hmm. So you essentially do some research on here's their budgets, and then you walk backwards to.
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah, so like quick example. So we had to do this for in our the venture firm I work for, our portfolio. We had to do this for one of our robotics companies pretty early on in the cycle, and I got to help the exec team on that. And then part of what we were doing, we basically, like that industry, people, it's like pulling teeth to get people to talk to you. It's very who you know. It's a very the networks are strong. So what we ended up having to do is we talked to the integrators a lot in that industry, that you've got like the robot manufacturers, you've got the software providers and different component parts makers, and then the end customers. And there's a lot of players, but the integrators that tend to do all the setting up, they had a lot of insights into it. And when we were able to find ones that were open to new players, they were very honest with us. So those were the ones we went to. The end customers, the manufacturers themselves, they kind of mess with you. So you got, a lot of times you just got to kind of network your way around and talk to more than one person too, because you want to make sure one person's not bullshitting you. But if you're getting the same consistent answers from like 5, 10, a dozen parties, you kind of start to get a feel, okay, this is what it's looking like, and you can be pretty confident from there.
That's super interesting. So the integrators, they were like a third party. They weren't a customer or anything.
Right. Yeah, that helped in that industry. It wouldn't work for everything, but.
Yeah. Steve, I wonder if there's some kind of third party, maybe not, I don't know, in your industry. When you're thinking about so you've got this perception with the universities that there's this free product, and this kind of touches on Amber's comment earlier. Have you started to think about like how to I guess launch with a priced product with their expectations being free? Like, have you thought about that in terms of like the mechanics of doing it?
Of launching a new product to charge them for when before we were free? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. So like, how do you I guess essentially not make people angry when you're launching something new that's a priced product?
That's a trick. Luckily our whole customer base is less than 1,000 organizations right now. So part of it is we have those longstanding relationships with a lot of them. So it's communication on what we're coming out with. Now, what we can't do is suddenly start charging them for this thing we provided them for free forever. So that just has to remain our base. We charge the applicants, and what we're looking is to add things for the universities to buy on top of that. It's gone well. We've got a few products in place that they're willing to pay for. Their budgets aren't huge, but when you have 1,000 customers and they have like he was saying, 10% maybe of their total budget can go to these kind of things, then there's enough money there to definitely justify going towards that market.
When one thing that we touched on earlier that I forgot to dive a little deeper into is this idea of knowing when you have the right price once it's out there in the world. Mm-hmm. And I think this is kind of the end point of that feedback loop. It's like once you get it out there, you're starting to get this feedback straight from the customer, and then you have to go back and revise. So I guess how do you approach that? Do you have a system in place for I guess measuring these kinds of things like conversions and that sort of stuff? Or how do you think about knowing whether you have the right price?
I trust the sales team to tell me why they're losing deals, right? And try to be honest about, well, we lost it because they're not willing to pay for that. I also look sales hates to lose deals, and they often, if given any rope, will undersell just to close the deal, right? And not necessarily lead you to profitability. As Amber was saying, if you're in a freemium model, that's, you have a similar problem there. Monitoring it over time is key. The other thing I guess that I've seen is small companies very frequently, from what I've seen, if they're not high pressured from their VCs, they will undersell their value. And they will undercharge for their services because they're people pleasers. Small companies are often people pleasers, right? They're in it because they're passionate about what they do, and they want you to use their product so bad that they start lowering their price to get you to use it and leave value on the table. I see that pretty frequently.
How do you know when you're in danger with respect to the price being too low? Does it just come out in terms of the business model? And I guess it would be apparent you're losing money, or
if you haven't done that research up front and interviewed folks and you come out with a price and you can't sell it for that, you'll find out pretty quick you're in trouble, that you invested $500,000 to build this product and you can't sell it at a profitable pace. That's a terrible position to be stuck in. It means either you didn't do the research at all, or your prospects were lying to you, or something in the world changed in the meantime. A new competitor popped up or something like that. But yeah, it is a slippery slope. Again, like I said, with your sales team to set a limit. We have to be profitable. You can't sell it for less than this. That's all very fixable, right? With commissions and whatnot, you can help them make sure that they don't drop too low and things. But
who else here is in the product world? Nick, are you in the product world yourself, sir?
No, I'm not. I'm here listening in and trying to gather more information.
Gotcha. What was there anything you were hoping to learn specifically around product?
Well, yeah, generally the title of it was product valuation. So some of this has been really interesting. One of the questions I have noted so far for Steve is, like, how does he decide who to bring into the product committee?
Good question.
Yeah. I've been fortunate in the past 3 companies I've been in to where the company has pretty strong relationships with the customer base, right? Andrew was saying in his industry, you have to be an insider to even talk to people, right? And that kind of thing. I've been fortunate to not have to have that kind of battle. We have so many customers that like our product and like our company that we could have 100 people join this product committee. So we just have to hold it to 10 to 15 of the ones that are maybe a little more tech savvy, and the ones that have been consistently honest with us on what they like and don't like and helped us be successful. So once you have that captive audience that likes you and likes your product, it's very easy. You just design a committee, you invite them to it, you make them feel special because they are special, they're helping you, right? And in return, you often give them early access to a new product, or you give them a discount on the initial release or whatever to reward them for helping you along the way.
When you said like the people that are honest with you, does that come through in like the commitments that actually come out of the conversations? Like you're testing, you're saying, hey, here's the price. Do you want it? They say yes. And then what? Yeah.
That's been very rewarding. When you talk to 10 or 15 and they're like, yeah, if you build that, we'll buy it for sure. Right. And then they do. That's a huge trust builder. And then if they don't come back and say, yeah, I'll buy it, and I would pay $10,000, and then they come back at the time and they're like, no, I can only pay $5,000. I mean, that's an issue. Right. But yeah.
Gotcha. For the folks that are not on camera, it's okay if you're not on camera and just listening in. I do want to probe a little bit and see if there are any questions of Rachel or Alric, if that's how you pronounce it. Rachel, are you chiming in?
Sure, I can chime in. So one thing that pops to mind with what Steve was just talking about in terms of commitment when you don't have a deep partnership, you can also look to things like letters of intent and literally get sort of pre-signups that they feel legally binding, at least. I wouldn't necessarily want to bring one of those to court, but there are ways when you don't have deep partnerships and you don't know if you have the level of trust with your potential customer. I actually did a lot of pricing back in the day, but I hopped into this because price validation is actually a really difficult thing. And I was, I'm always learning. So always want to know if somebody's got some sort of new clever ways or a algorithm that's worth sharing that tells you where that tipping point in the market is, for example. I mean, I think everything Steve said is spot on, right? You can't just set it and forget it. You have to keep an eye on it. And things like churn can tell you if you've got it wrong. I think one thing that always came up when I was dealing with pricing and talking about churn and changing your prices and causing it is to be really, really clear internally with your company about how much churn. You should have a churn goal that is not 0, I guess is what I'm saying. And that's a thing a lot of small companies also get wrong. They think they want the price to be the perfect one where all the supposed good customers will say yes. And it isn't quite that simple, and that isn't actually ideal. So yeah, and I liked your example before of the raise it by 5% until you lose 20%. Was that what you said?
Yeah, that's at least one thing I've heard.
Big numbers before, but those seem pretty reasonable.
Yeah. Steve, do you have any kind of metrics that are goals around churn at the company? Is it zero?
Yeah, I love that. I love that comment, Rachel. On like I said a few minutes ago, small companies are so passionate and they love their customers. They can't imagine their customers would ever leave them, and that's not realistic. And often that's even out of your control, right? Where they get a new CIO and he comes with his favorite software, and there's nothing you didn't lose it because they don't like you or because you didn't serve them well. They just something else happened out of your control. So yeah, our churn target is less than 5%. And we've been pretty good about that. Last year we got slaughtered with COVID, but we think they'll come back this year. But yeah, I really agree with that. You have to be realistic about what your churn. You have to study it and watch it very closely to make sure it's not moving beyond where you think it should move, and really in conjunction with price. Are you losing customers because they can't afford to keep paying you every year?
Yeah, and that idea of moving from freemium into paid, I would argue that is actually possible. I think it does require a good deal of transparency. If the freemium model is important to you, I don't think you ever have to do it, even if whatever you're providing in the end actually costs you money. But I would say if it is costing you money, especially money that you didn't anticipate, and you're clear about that with people from the get-go, you can continue and you can move people from free into paid, especially depending on the kind of product you have. Stickier products, it's an easier move to move somebody that was getting it for free to something that's paid. I'm thinking of just recently, Expensify started moving up the point where you have to pay them, right? So it's a thing I recommend a lot, and I'm always like, it's free, and it is not free for very long anymore. So I'm still going to keep recommending it, and I don't think the people that are already using it and finding value in it are going to leave. But I do think a lot of their casual users that cost them probably some cycles on customer support are going to churn, but I hope that was their purpose.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I like your point about communication and being clear with people. I had to raise prices one time. It was starting my first company, and I was super scared to raise prices. I was like, our customers are not going to like us. They're going to be like, what the heck? You were telling me it's this price, now it's another price. And we really just explained to them in a very straightforward way, like, look, here's our business model. If we keep selling it to you at this price, we're not going to be a business anymore. And it's not always that extreme. I'm not saying you should ever lie to a customer, but you should be clear about what is going on, even if it's just like harming your company. There was one time we had price inconsistency in the market, and we just had to tell people, look, these prices got inconsistent, and now people are having a hard time selling the product, and there's these weird perceptions around it. So we're going to have to make everybody have the same exact price. It's funny. There's a guy that comes to these that had a map pricing tool. I was like, I really could have used that during my time at a company. But so yeah, no, I think those are some really good insights around communicating with your customers. Do you have any, Rachel, do you have any tips other than that about that kind of communication?
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, in extreme situations, they might be upset about paying extra, but they'd certainly be upset about the product simply not existing as well, right? So if the product is valuable to them, even if they were getting it for free, they want to know before you just close your doors, right? Like, I think a lot of us have had a moment like that with one of our restaurants in town and been like, I wish I had known, I would have gone there more or whatever. Like, you don't want a business that you really do like to just up and leave, even if you were basically enjoying it for free up until then. So, I mean, yes, it's terrifying. And whether you're talking about going from free to $5 a month, or whether you're talking about, going from $5 to $50, an increase, I would say, yeah, if these are good fit customers, then hopefully they are getting value, and hopefully you're also really good at helping them articulate the value back to whomever is paying the bill on their side, if it isn't an individual, right? Like, you should do the work for them of being like, we've saved you $10,000 over the last year. So even at this new price of $500 a month, this is still a net positive. We hope you'll stick with us. And then there's the other version of it, going back to that churn idea. Like, sometimes you should just fire some of your customers, and sometimes you raise your prices just to do it. And like I said, I hope to a certain extent, like when a company like Expensify does that, they're doing that on purpose and intending to lose far more than the 5% that Steve was talking about with your churn on your ideal portfolio. Like, I definitely raised prices many a time to try and get rid of certain portions of a portfolio. Because they were just so much lift internally to maintain that they weren't the revenue producers, right? They were loss leaders. And so you raise the price until they're not, or at least until they're lesser so, and you hopefully have less of them pulling down your operations.
That's really, I have a question about that, follow up on that, because we're facing the same thing. Some of our customers got a sweetheart deal in the early days of the company, and they're still living on it. And the company is scared to death of raising the price. And I'm bringing information to show that these customers are barely or not profitable, and they're very heavy on the support. When you did that, consciously raising the price to either reach a point where it's profitable, how did you convey that obviously the customer, you're not telling them that, but how did you convey that or sell that internally?
So internally, I think my experience was pretty unique. There were regulations coming into play that we could see on the horizon. And so I was sort of dealing with specters on, like, these guys are a big heavy lift for us today, and they're only going to become worse, right? Because it was certain categories of e-commerce. So it was this particular thing that I did a bunch of times had to do around payment processing prices and raising those on categories of things that it's hard to find a payment processor for reasons that are obvious now with all the regulations in place. But I was there before the regulations were there, and we could see that they were coming, and we already knew that these people were a pain. But I think in an ideal case, right, because I would never say that's an ideal situation to find yourself in. But in an ideal case where it's just this is a loss leader, if your sales team in general is not having a hard time creating a pipeline of customers at your new standardized pricing in your particular example, but they're, say, losing 4 hours a week to maintaining relationships with these sweetheart, because that's often how it works with software, and these are from the beginning, they've got your personal cell phone number, they're all up in it, right? So hopefully what you can make an argument for is that if all of our resources were focused on that incoming funnel, and we really devoted all of our resources to that, we'd be able to maintain, let's say, 20 more ideal customers for losing these 5 sweethearts that have been there since the beginning. And the net to the company would be obviously positive, right? So if you can just sort of say that the shift to all of your resources being devoted to your main revenue generating line, and if you can prove that with actual hours spent on customer support or on whatever the thing is that they're costing you on, or even if it's just replace them on using our CPU cycles, right? Just this is a better use of our servers. Like, we're going to have to upgrade if we don't get rid of these guys, and we won't, and could take on 20 more of our ideal candidate without it. But you just come up with some sort of our resources would be better spent argument.
That makes sense. Yep. Thank you.
One thought on this too is with us, when we raised our prices, we asked our customers, we were like, because a lot of them, they weren't getting a lot of value out of the product anyway. So we were like, just having the conversation like, hey, we need to have these raised. Would you rather just not use the product or not sell it in our case? And we were totally okay with that. And what we did, because it was a physical product, we actually ended up telling them we'll buy some of it back. Now, I don't think that really works in a software case, but you might be able to, I don't know, do something along the same lines. I don't know.
I like the buyback. That's an interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we just said, hey, prices have to come up, but we understand that if you don't feel like you can sell it at that price, then we'll just take everything back. And most people were just like, okay, no, just raise the price, it's fine. So yeah, and then they still didn't sell it. But so Alric, are you online as well, listening in?
Yeah, I'm listening in.
I wanted to ask you, are you, by the way, I'm sorry if I butchered your name. How do you actually say your name?
It's Ulrich.
Ulrich. Okay. I had like the whatever nasally, but, are you in the product world?
Yes, I am a product manager at TransPerfect.
Gotcha. Have you run into any pricing issues, or are there any things that are on your mind that you want to sort of ask the group?
We've been trying to price one of our newer products, an interpretation service platform, and we're kind of caught in the between a licensing model and also a service model. So it's a fun thing to price when I've never priced a product before. In terms of like the SaaS model that we are trying to go towards, we're just running against our dev hours and seeing what's the minimum that we cannot afford, right? And then we give our salespeople range to see what their relationships or their client relationships are willing to pay for the product.
Gotcha. That's I guess I've heard that called the cost plus model, where you kind of look at your costs, you see what your minimum operating expenses are and everything, and then you add on top of that to come up with some kind of price point. And the nice thing about thinking about that, and I actually think that's something you kind of need to incorporate across the board, because you always need to know what your costs are.
Right.
But the other end of that is the harder part, which is like, well, what's the value perception on the customer's end that you can actually charge? So you kind of have to think about it on both ends. You have your costs, your price, and your value, and hopefully your value perception is higher than the price, which is the whole game, I guess.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the client calls that I've sat in, we do offer the value. Our product is in development at the moment, so the way we've approached it while dealing with clients has been, we try to understand their workflow, we try to understand what their business model is and how we fit into it, and we will build functionality that they need to succeed within their process. And so we'll run that against different clients and see if this is the new feature that we need to add into our toolkit to make it more valuable.
Yeah, that's totally another way to do it, right? You look at the customer, you see like, what process are we optimizing? How much value does this drive in terms of saving like costs or saving time, or, driving efficiency? So you can actually quantify some of that perception of value based on like real metrics, but you really have to have an inside look at the customers. Steve, I want to know, when you get into these interviews with the customers, are you teasing some of that information out of them? Are they open enough to understand that, like the real value points that it would drive for them?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Like, for example, with this recent audition room product, it's virtual auditions, right? And you can imagine performing arts kids that want to get into school is different. Unless any of you tried this, all of us, if you went to college, you applied to college and you got in mostly based on your grades and your extracurriculars. That's not the same for performing arts. If you want to go to dance at Ohio State, right, the way it was in all years except for last year, you go to Ohio State and you dance in front of their staff. And then you get in based on your ability to dance or what potential they see in you. And so that's a very expensive prospect for the student and the parents of the student. If I need to apply to 5 colleges, I've got to travel to 5 different cities, spend the night perhaps, audition, buy the outfits, all this other jazz. So our virtual replacement for that is a gigantic value, right? Because now people can do it from home. We did a lot of work with high quality video, high quality audio to give the best chance at seeing and hearing the prospect accurately. But now you don't have to travel to 5 cities. You can do it all from home. We charge you per each, but it's like 5% or less of what you would have paid otherwise to go try out. So yeah, that value proposition is huge. And getting that in front of our university customers was very easy. Once you explain that to them, as well as you're dealing with international students that want to come to Ohio State, and they previously had to fly from China sometimes to go to Columbus, Ohio to try a dance tryout for Ohio State, which to me is insane that happens, but that does. And yeah, so the value proposition there was an easy sell and always important to point out.
Gotcha. Well, folks, this has been a super interesting conversation. I think there's probably a lot more to talk about around pricing, but we seem to hit some of the really key thoughts and ideas around it, and we've got some really good takeaways. So thank you everybody for sharing your thoughts and experience. Steve, thank you so much for coming and helping us out this time. I want to ask before we jump off, and if nobody has any idea, it's okay, but are there any topics that you think we should cover at future Product Tanks? The next Product Tank, we actually have the director of product for Olive is coming in and doing a product breakdown for us, which will be pretty interesting. And that's coming up in February. But are there any thoughts around future topics? You know, we're just on one little end of product, which is pricing, which is interesting because some might even think this kind of falls into the realm of marketing, but we find that a lot of times it does end up in the product realm as well. Any thoughts, ideas? Andrew, you got one?
Yeah, I have a couple. I mean, one just generally that was on today's topic that at some point I'd be interested in discussing, because I mean, the thing about product is it does blend into so many domains. It's one of the things that's cool about it. But once you figure the like general range of pricing out, like tweaking it from like a psychological and customer perception perspective, is somewhat more relative to like I guess like certain enterprise, like SMB focused products or consumer products especially, but like there's some interesting stuff that you can do, and you can also test this a lot too that I think is really interesting. That would be one. But then if the director of product from Olive's coming in, AI products, like people broadly speaking a lot of times like don't realize this, but they're not like just as generic as SaaS products typically, and there's a ton of challenges unique to actually selling and pricing like an AI product. Like for instance, they typically do not have the margins of a software business, and there's typically a considerable services component to that. So just getting someone who's had firsthand lens into that and like how they think about that and how they figure out pricing, because it's pricing any product is challenging, but there's like some extra dimensions to any AI based product. So I just love to kind of get a closer look at that from someone who's been there and done that.
Super good thoughts. I appreciate that. I'll make sure to incorporate that somehow in the questions.
Yeah. However you can. It was just thoughts, something I'm interested in.
I'm interested.
Don't base everything off me though.
Yeah. So, no, you're good. Yeah. Any other thoughts of upcoming topics? Going once.
I don't know if you guys have. This is the first one I attended, so I don't know how much you've covered in the past. But Steve was talking about, I was interested in his product committee conversations a lot, because it feels like something you'd have to immediately think about in an early stage. So something along the lines of looking at customer feedback and how you can drive that to either increase the value for them or figuring out what they're focusing on that you might not immediately see.
I think we're good unless there's any others. But yeah, everybody, thank you so much for coming out. Steve, once again, thank you much for helping us out. And we will see you all next time.